Welcome to this week's edition of Freedom and Prosperity Radio. We are the weekly radio news magazine put together here at the Virginia Institute for Public Policy. Find us online at tertiumquids.org. Find us in our Tuesday morning group coalition meetings. Find out more by emailing our directors, and then you can be invited to each time we gather in Richmond to help push public policy forward. We're more than a think tank. We're a do tank. Much of Virginia's legislative agenda is and has been pushed forward by us here at the Virginia Institute for Public Policy. And so we're not just talking about it. We're putting the rubber to the road. Today, a story ripped right from the headlines, and it's the old expression, it's not who votes, but who counts the votes. We've read the story from the Joint Legislative Audit Review Commission that pointed out that the Virginia Board of Elections has been politicized by the previous gubernatorial administration. And then ripped from here, the Commonwealth's attorney from Hampton has apparently, according to the story we have here, just denied following Virginia election procedure. Let's dig into this a little bit with a national security expert and member of the Virginia Voters Alliance, Bob Heffley. Bob, thank you so much for taking some time out with us to go into this story. The Virginia Voters Alliance has been at the avant-garde of so many of these problems in here. So take us into what happened with the Hampton Commonwealth's attorney and not following election procedures in 2017.
Well, thank you, Joe, for having me on here. And just to clarify, the problem right now isn't yet saying that the Commonwealth's attorney hasn't done anything, but it certainly looks like it's headed in that direction. On July 16th, a little more than 2 months ago, the Virginia Voters Alliance Hampton chapter submitted a formal complaint to the Hampton Commonwealth's attorney, alleging that the chief and assistant chief election officers of a particular precinct at the last election in November, they willfully disregarded Virginia law regarding voter identification requirements. Now, the Hampton Commonwealth's attorney is recently reelected during that election.
Convenient.
And we we've been waiting for 2 months to see what if there's going to be any action on this, and we have a letter going in actually tomorrow, formally asking before we shift over to the Court of Public Opinion if the court that should be handling this chooses not to do that.
Well, let's remind everyone in a refresher course on Virginia law requiring a photo ID to prove identity when you arrive for elections, along with being registered to vote in that precinct. Correct, Bob?
Yeah, that's right. And there's a list of 7 or 8 alternatives to that. If the Virginia driver's license is not permitted, it's not as onerous as it sounds in terms of. And if you'd like me to explain what brings us to the fore.
Well, we even went to the point when the law went into place. The McDonnell administration went so far as to put out money so that the IDs could be free for those, so that there was never a question as to a poll tax or anything like that. So you can just go to a DMV and get a photo identification with your home and with your face and address on it, and walk out of there, in whatever time it takes that particular DMV to process that. But there's also university, I guess, state-issued university IDs are valid as well. And was this a precinct that was impacted by university voters?
Oh, absolutely. And we know this happens around the state in college towns. And in this case, we're talking about Hampton University. And every election, the students show up literally by the busload to vote at the precinct nearest the university. And, of course, that's good. That somebody is getting these young folks out to vote. So when you have a voter, and by the way, Hampton University is it's known as the Harvard of the historically black institutions, and So kids come from all over the United States to Hampton University.
Esteemed, yeah, very much.
There's a lot of potential for, are they voted absentee at home? Do they meet resident requirements? And so forth. So what happened on that day is that very early, one of the first voters presented an out-of-state driver's license. The election officer, all the people there are election officers, so the person behind the computer, checking the person in, asked if there's any other type of ID, and apparently he didn't have anything else. It was assumed he was a college student. A bus pulled up, and you got young people coming in, but it doesn't make any difference, really.
Yeah, it's not the address he's registered at.
So the alternative, and just so anybody who is not familiar with this, because I think most of your listeners probably don't need to use a provisional ballot because they come prepared. But when in doubt, the voting officer invites the individual. Let's say, I'm sorry, if that's all you have is an ID, and it looks like you're on the rolls here, you can have take a provisional ballot, and they're sent to another table. And where usually the chief, their assistant chief, fills out a provisional ballot that, it's a ballot, but it's temporary, and it goes to the electoral board that has a hearing 4 days after the election. And that individual has until, I think, that Friday, voting's always on a Tuesday, to go to the registrar's office and fix whatever the problem was. It could be a problem with an address, or in this case, the wrong ID or not the proper ID. They can correct that. That can be recorded at the registrar's office, and when they have the hearing, usually it's kind of rubber stamped by a clerk who says, yes, the person came in, I saw a valid ID, and they have a quick vote on each person that says yes or no. Then, okay, that whatever they voted, now that counts. That ballot goes into the hopper.
Right, and they have the time to go find their ID, whatever it may be, where their registration may be. And this is to prevent those out-of-state residents. And with so many great universities, we have people from all over the country residing here, and the residence requirements, change here and there. But you want to make sure that people aren't voting twice. As you mentioned earlier, Bob, you could vote absentee back where mom and dad are, and then vote again where you are. And we've seen campaigns suborning this sort of behavior. Oh, it counts more where you're going to school, or go to where your grandma's house is because we need that state or whatever, especially in federal elections. But it can even throw a local election, can't it?
Right. And sadly, we have every reason to believe that sometimes they're told, well, you voted at home already? Well, let's go and try to do it here. That's all. That's hearsay evidence, but there's no shortage of that. Now, the key point here is that when this happened, for the first time, this precinct had a Republican election officer. Now, as you know, by Virginia state law, there's supposed to be a 50-50 parity with election officers at every precinct. It's very hard to do. It's hard for the registrar to find the people, and it's hard for people like myself, those of us working on in either party, to make sure that they get the right people there. So this is the first time a Republican election officer has been there. Therefore, it begs the question, how long has this been going on? Because when she found out about this and wanted to offer this gentleman a provisional ballot, sent him to the chief, bottom line is the chief said, no, this out-of-state driver's license is okay. And going forward, any out-of-state driver's license today is okay.
So,
go ahead.
So now the Republican election official, what was their reaction? Did they bring this up to the chief that was against the rules, or did they?
Right.
Bob?
There is a document that they use for training across the state. It's called and they keep it there, and you can get this online, by the way. It's called the What If Guide.
Yeah.
And what if the person, and actually words "what if" are there. What if the person doesn't have a Virginia driver's license? And they go down the list. Mm-hmm. By the way, any Virginia University
student
or
ID,
any higher education student ID is also good.
Yeah,
this election officer was told, as were the others there at the tables, no, you don't need to ask for a student ID.
That seems.
In other words, don't go down the list. An out-of-state license is just fine. And by the way, student IDs usually do not have dates on them.
Right. There's no expiration date on them.
Right.
Yeah. So the blatantly flaunting what anyone can see as election law. You filed suit with the Commonwealth's attorney, and you haven't heard back from them regarding this, even though it's been 2 months. Any sort of reaction as to status of whether there'll be a hearing on it or anything?
No, and there's an election coming up, and we would think there'd be some sort of action. Now, internally, I think the registrar and the electoral board in this city, which, of course, as on the state level, is controlled by 2 Democrats and 1 Republican because the governor's a Democrat, and those 2 seats go to that party. That we think that precinct will be taken care of. In terms of not having a repeat of this. In fact, we're sure it will. However, what about this, which is actually a Class 5 felony? If someone willfully does this, an election officer does this and has been properly trained and knows better, that merits an investigation and an action. Now, I'm not saying the Commonwealth's attorney isn't going to do anything. In all fairness, we have to wait. But it's been 60 days, and you would think that there would be something going on here, particularly with the election coming up. I've been told by my friends on the other side there is no voter fraud in Virginia, and that's almost true. You leave out a key word in front of voter fraud, and that is prosecuted voter fraud.
That's a key.
And here's a good example of if the Commonwealth's attorney, by the way, who needs to recuse himself because he was elected at this particular election, and the numbers weren't close. It's not like the 94th district right next to us in Newport News that was a dead tie, and you know how
one
that
vote,
went, by lottery.
Yeah, one vote can mean an awful lot. We found that this last election, but that circles me back to this Joint Legislative Audit Review Commission report that said that it found evidence of political pressure being pushed down by the State Board of Election, and that they stopped short of saying there was fraud, but actually in their report talks about how one election official said it was their job to get Hillary Clinton elected, and an environment by which one party was openly supported over the other. This is a governmental report. This is a legal document saying this. So when your friends say there is no evidence of prosecuted voter fraud, there is plenty of evidence of these cases. So the Virginia Voters Alliance has for years been at the avant-garde of trying to clean up things. You've worked so very hard at getting database matching records. We found thousands and thousands of people through your efforts registered in multiple places and more than just one. And that's just in the research you guys have been able to do in the Mid-Atlantic, and all stuff that we're told that is impossible to do or is a violation somehow of somebody's privacy and or civil rights if we do it. How do we clean this up, Bob? You're a national security expert. If we can't keep this part clean, and we talk about Russian collusion and all the other stuff that grabs headlines, I mean, this goes beyond, they didn't hack into the machines, but maybe they hacked into the people who then walked into the machines and started to behave, tried to throw an election for somebody.
There's no question. There are so many. I visit a lot of precincts on Election Day, and an election officer, if they want to be forthcoming with you, will say, they prevented voter fraud just by turning people away who did not put up a fight. People who with an out-of-state license trying to vote and it appears obvious that they were just giving it a shot, and how they got there and why they got there, you can only use your imagination. But to answer your question, what can we do? And what the Hampton Republican Party did is, and I don't know why it took so many years to do it, make sure you have Republicans as election officers.
You have to, yeah.
During elections, and anybody involved with their party, there's so much competition for volunteers. The campaigns want people to pass out literature. There's working on the outside. There's all sorts of things to do. But this was kind of a revelation. Someone said, well, instead of working so hard at trying to get votes, maybe if we spent more manpower on preventing illegal votes.
Yeah, that's a great big number of those.
Might put us ahead.
And I have also suggested both, for Democratic Party listeners and Republican Party listeners and libertarians listening as well. If you want to, do the holistic approach to this, the more of us that turn out at these elections, the harder it is to manipulate the results through whatever, because it takes quite a bit of effort to get 2 or 3 phony baloney voters, set up and ready to go. But when we see voter turnouts in the 20 and 25%, Bob, I think that we're just begging for it to happen, because what's the expression about fooling some of the people all of the time? The fewer of us turn out, the more likely whatever voter fraud takes place takes a bigger impact percentage wise.
Right, and again, for anybody listening on either party, turning out the vote is the first thing you can do. Then you can work on election. Consider being an election officer.
Yeah, absolutely.
Every precinct, our little city has 30 precincts. When you look at the manning there, that you need 30 to 60 to 90 people. And they're there, but some of them have an R or a D behind their name, and they're not really. The registrar just has to plug them in. So
right, it's appointees.
If we have more vigilant, honest people to act as election, and this is a perfect case right here. Here is an election officer who was not part of the cronyism at that precinct.
Yep, absolutely.
And he was just doing the right thing. And by the way, when this happened, as this was happening and she was being told, no, let this go, she pulled out the what-if document and said, well, wait a minute.
It says don't do this.
No, and this is the key. This is no, don't worry about that.
Jeez.
Just any license is fine. And we're thinking, how long has this been going on here?
Oh, I know. But you talk about that volunteership. I worry in this day and age of people being harassed at restaurants and harassed in parking lots, that part of this is to scare people from, standing up and saying, hey, I'm just an election official, if they're afraid their tires are going to get slashed or their families are going to get harassed because they stuck their head up. And that's where I'm truly, truly frightened that we've become 19th century France, where it's mob rule and whoever's got the biggest set of pitchforks is going to win. And I really think Americans of both parties need to stand up against this kind of mob rule thuggery. Even if you giggle at it, it helps your party win. At some point, it's going to turn and it's going to help the other party win, and it's not good from either side.
Right. And, you make a point, because in this particular case, the election officer, very brave woman. I mean, this complaint has an affidavit, her affidavit with it, a sworn testimony of what happened. Mm-hmm. Okay, and that's key. If you're going to put in, you can complain about something when you have a sworn affidavit. Yeah. Then and she was is still extremely nervous. And certainly not mentioning her name, and we're avoiding that as much as possible.
Oh, no, and I understand. It's public record, though, and any zealot who can go and get the complaint, or and never mind if somebody's a little political operative within the offices. We've seen the Project Veritas videos where these political operatives that are working in these inner office bureaucratic offices seem to have favorites one side or another. It's all as un-American as it can be see, yet we're seemingly shrugging it off, Bob. We have to run, but I appreciate all the work you're doing down there in the Hampton Roads area as part of Virginia Voter Alliance, and it's vavoters.org is the website. If please contribute help, because the only reason I think the last 10 years has seen a tightening up of Virginia's voting laws is because of the effort of groups like yours, the Virginia Voters Alliance, and you've certainly always been out at the avant-garde of it.
Well, thank you very much. And I was just checking the website you gave out there because I had a different one. It's actually Virginia Voters Alliance.
Oh, I'm sorry. I'm sorry, Virginia. My apologies. I was looking at the wrong webpage, and I hadn't opened it, but VirginiaVotersAlliance.org.
Yep, that's it.
Thank you, sir. I really appreciate it, and you have a wonderful weekend. Thank you for taking some time out with us.
Thank you for what you're doing.
Welcome back to this week's edition of Freedom and Prosperity Radio. And you know how frequently education will come up into our discussion points, because it really, to the essence of freedom and prosperity, comes to our ability to know all the basics of society and get forth with there. Peter Murphy is on with us. He is the vice president at the Invest in Education Coalition and the IEC's campaign to push forward the USA Workforce Tax Credit Act. Peter, thank you for taking a little time out with us this weekend here on Freedom and Prosperity Radio. How are you doing, sir?
Joe, I'm doing fine. Thanks for having me on.
So talk to us first and foremost, the abstract on the Tax Credit Act. I know that many of my listeners get flinched when they hear, because they feel like just cut the damn taxes in the beginning and just leave it in our pockets. But so this is something, though, that will benefit those people who are working towards coming up with better school choice options across the country, correct?
Correct. The USA Workforce Tax Credit Act is a bill, 5153, H.R. 5153. It's sponsored by Congressman Lloyd Smucker of Pennsylvania, and he ran his family business in the construction industry and brings a lot of that private sector, the job creation to Congress. And this legislation is designed to address a very acute need in our economy right now, and that is the lack of skilled workers, both because we're not producing the high school graduates that can take on a lot of these jobs, and we have a lot of young people in particular without the skill sets who can take on these jobs. So right now we have almost 7 million unfilled jobs in this country of varying skill levels, but up to 500,000 of those are in the manufacturing sector. There's more than 250,000 of those jobs in the construction sector. These are available and going unfilled, and because we have a skills gap. So we've got to find ways to address that and get more Americans with the skills they need to fill these positions.
And the math in this pencils out in such a profound way. Not only are these jobs well-paying jobs and career jobs that you can do, but they're also without the kind of student loan crutch, crippling weight of debt that many of our college students come out of college, a C plus, maybe a B at the McIntyre School of Business and Management at UVA, and they're going to wind up in a middle management job making maybe $45,000 a year, trying to pay back, $160,000 in student loan debt. This is something you can do that you can feel good and look back on at the end of a day and say, I've done this, as well as not have to worry about, can I make my student loan payment this month?
Some of these jobs will run high 5 figures, even 6 figures, and be paid to somebody with the requisite skills in what's supposedly or so-called blue-collar sectors. But in fact, in your early 20s, you can be making great money, owing no money, and at the same time, if this career path is understood and accessed more and more. And that's what really needs to happen. Now, industry groups and businesses are stepping up because the demand is there and it's in their interest to do that. But what this bill would do is really give them a return on investment, enable them to invest their money, get more workers trained, to undertake more partnerships with community colleges and other workforce agencies, so they can train people in a matter of months as opposed to multiple years. Well, it's just an ideal opportunity to encourage more of this, because the things that government's doing now are just not keeping up with the need in our economy.
I can understand to a small degree, an elected official, a school board member not wanting to say, hey, we've got bricklayer or plumbing or welding or these blue-collar skilled trades jobs, because I guess they feel like the job of a school superintendent or a teacher is to inspire you to be greater than that. But somewhere over the last couple of generations, we've lost the idea that these are good jobs. The stereotypical quote from a father to a son, I want a better life for you than I have, has turned into a nightmare for many people, because it's debt and it's indebtedness and indentured servitude to your debt. It may not be to one Uber lord now, but it's this indebtedness that cripples your ability to be free.
Yeah, you mentioned bricklayer as an example. It so happens I know two very highly skilled bricklayers. Now, they started their careers doing that. That's not what they're doing 30 years later. They used that skill set to move up the chain, and they're actually running major job sites as foremen. And their houses are paid for. They don't have college degrees. They don't owe any money, and they're paying cash for their kids' college now.
Exactly.
So again, I give you that anecdotal example because there's nothing terribly unique about that. But that's what has to be understood better in our high schools. These are excellent middle class jobs, and the truth of the matter is, you don't have to go outside most families to realize, look, every child is different.
Yeah,
college is not for everyone, and for many people, probably for most people, college makes a lot of sense, and it's what they should do. But for other young people, it's not. And particularly if they have a gift in working with their hands, for example. So there's lots of opportunity out there. This is, I think, these opportunities are very real, and I think it behooves businesses and industries and people I've spoken to in the industry have more and more made connections to high schools and to guidance counselors and showing up at like college, career day and things like that. They're getting the word out more and more, and that's a good thing.
And remind us again, and we're visiting with Peter Murphy from the Invest Education Coalition, and they're pushing for this USA Workforce Tax Credit Act, and this opens that door to allow businesses in these trades to partner with community colleges, but even at high schools. We, in our flagship city, have a joint program between the Charlottesville and the Albemarle schools to create a technical education center and to create even what used to be called not internships but apprenticeships programs, so that these kids come out of high school in some cases ready to go onto the job sites.
That's vitally important. More of that is happening. There's been efforts by the Trump administration and Congress to expand apprenticeships and invest more in career and technical ed. Those are all good things. It's not enough. More needs to be done. And the Smucker bill, H.R. 5153, USA Workforce Tax Credit Act, this is legislation that will take it a step further and get more private sector direct involvement. So they're dictating the program, they're dictating the skills they need, and they're putting up some of their money to do that in a way that that encourages them to do that. Yeah, because it's good for the economy, it's good for businesses, it's good for workers and getting them the skills they need.
Having been in Pennsylvania before, and I know their educational landscape is different than Virginia's, where in Pennsylvania, charter schools are often driven by private sector people. As one charter school president told me, he said, well, we get kids excited about rocket science by actually bringing in a rocket scientist to teach it to them, and they're allowed to do those things. And in Virginia, we still hamstring ourselves a little bit by insisting that anyone teach culinary has to be a a professional teacher who happens to know something about culinary rather than somebody who's run a catering business for 20 years and has decided this is how they want to spend their last years in the workforce. That's something legislative we need to look at, too, here on the local level, isn't it, Peter?
Schools districts are often hamstrung by arduous labor contracts and kind of this is the way we've always done things, and to some extent financial constraints perhaps. So I think the nice thing about a bill like this is it's giving the financial incentives to go beyond that and enable more to be done in partnership with industry, with schools, with other nonprofit partners. So, but clearly, school districts have to adapt to the needs of our economy. And what's manifest more and more is too many young people are going to college when they should consider something in the alternative. And as more and more of these high schools got into the college prep track, well, that does a disservice to many young people who that's just not the right track for them.
And it's inflexible, in that inflexibility leaves kids behind, and then they're left really wondering what society has to give them.
Exactly right. And so I think the more we spur innovation, the more we nudge financially or through the tax code, as this bill does, companies to step up and again, form these partnerships and spend more time, both in the short term, getting people the skills they need to fill these jobs. But I think over a longer term, getting more and more high schools to change their programming and adjust their programming so young people get additional, skills training beyond the kind of college prep route that too many of them are headed for that they may not be suitable for.
Oh, absolutely. And that's where you really, I have 3 kids in there, as you said earlier, Peter, as different as the day is long. And that's what we really need to. So what can the listeners do to encourage our members of Congress to jump on the Smucker bill and to, push for this Workforce Tax Credit Act?
Well, they can certainly check out the bill on our website, usaworkforce.org, usaworkforce.org. They can get more information there. They can see the number of organizations that have signed on in favor. If they're part of an organization, they can join that coalition, and they can certainly contact their member of Congress, either to co-sponsor and, most importantly, pass the bill. There's going to be a lot of stuff still coming out of this Congress before the year's end. No matter what happens in the election, there's going to be plenty more this Congress is going to be doing by the calendar year end. This bill should be part of what they do, and believe it or not, congressmen still actually respond to constituent demands, and so people shouldn't feel discouraged about that.
No, absolutely.
It's easy to be, but there's no harm in trying, and so we hope people will step up and take an interest and do that.
Well, and that is an important point as well. And it sounded like from what you told us earlier, Peter, that the president is willing to look at something like this as something he's ready to sign.
No question. I mean, he spent a lifetime dealing with these skills trades in his career as a developer, and I think he has a great appreciation for it. And he has already himself taken steps through executive order and signing the CTE legislation that he wants to move in this direction. And so, I think certainly if Congress put something like this on his desk, he would sign it. Indeed.
We're visiting with Peter Murphy from the Invest in Education Coalition about these blue-collar skilled trades, workforce development, and this bill that's coming through. It's the Smucker bill, and people can contact whether it's Morgan Griffith or Tom Garrett and get in with them, Bob Goodlatch, and let them know that this is what you want them to be looking at as the congressional season continues while while other things are going on. But even beyond that, and Peter, I'm going to go off on a little bit of a tangent here, but 2019 here in Virginia, at least half of all of our school boards across the Commonwealth of Virginia will be up for election, including all, as well as all 140 seats in our General Assembly. This is going to be a big year. Virginia took a step towards some school choice. They still are not great in my eyes when it comes to this kind of blue-collar workforce development. And to those who are thinking towards 2019 as well, these school boards need to understand that these partnerships are available. They're win-win situations for both. If you can just, I guess, as you mentioned, there's some power brokering going on. Let go a little bit. It's like the old song, "Hold on loosely." If you hold too tightly, you're going to lose control. And the kids are disinterested in some of the things they're teaching them. But this message is, hey, give them every option. Put everything out in front of the high school kids and say, try these things out. You find that this is the career for you. Is that a fair thing to point out going into 2019?
Clearly, one thing the school board can do that doesn't cost anything is make connections, reach out to business and industries, and invite them into the school. I mean, that just doesn't take a lot of effort to do that. I mean, business and industry would welcome it. They're doing it. They're taking initiative themselves. But school districts shouldn't sit as bystanders here. They can do that. They can highlight the opportunities that are out there for their young people, and get off of this bias to the extent it exists that everyone has to go to four-year college. It's just nonsense. And it's a bad message because, again, we're talking about high five-figure and low six-figure jobs that you could be getting before most of your friends are graduating college. I mean, it's just extraordinary, the opportunity. And so school districts can really do, and frankly, that's a great platform to run in. We're going to get more. We're going to connect our kids with more career opportunities. That's an initiative. That's a great initiative to push. It's a great initiative to run on.
I agree with you. I can see the bumper stickers now, Peter. I did a program for our local Chamber of Commerce on this very subject, and eye-opening even to me, and I'd like to think I'm more sensitive to some of the mainstream things that are going on, finding out that many of these community colleges, this is where nursing degrees are taught, and that I interviewed a young lady who is the director of a department at University of Virginia Health System. She was a doctor, but she started out, she went to community college, got a nursing degree, began working as a nurse. The doctors she worked with helped her get through school, finished some postgraduate degrees in nursing, finished that, and then went on and followed a medical career, decided, well, I've got this far, let me see if taking night classes I can get a medical degree, and now is the head of a department. I mean, these are American success stories that don't come prepackaged in a pretty box, that are real.
You make a great point, and I alluded to this earlier, where you may pick a skills trade and do that for a while, but from that position, you can move up, right? Nobody stays stagnant, right? It's not like you're working for the next 40 years in one particular position or field or location. You build on those skills. You build on the contacts you're making. You show other skills like managing other people. Yeah. I mean, these are all things that somebody in their early 20s can build on and become more than that, in their 30s and 40s. I mean, I mentioned Lloyd Smucker, congressman from, the lead sponsor of this bill. This is a guy who started out, I think, as a sheetrocker.
Okay, yeah.
And it was a sheetrocking business that became a major construction firm in southeastern Pennsylvania. So, nobody has to stay stagnant. You get skills, you work them, you build on them, and you make contacts and you make impressions.
And every business, and I think every business wants that infusion of youth and enthusiasm because the worst thing for a business is to grow stagnant. So you always want young people coming in saying, hey, I want to try it this way, or did you ever think of it this way? Young ideas are what keeps these businesses growing instead of just saying, well, all right, we had our 40 years or 20 years and it's time to fade off into oblivion. Some of these companies, the infusion of youth every year is what drives them.
Well, not only that, but you have in these trades, these blue collar trades. I keep hearing the average age is 50-somethings.
Wow.
So that's a lot of. So we talk about available jobs now. Think of the numbers that are going to open up in the short term in 5 years.
Yeah.
A lot of these 50-something-year-olds are going to be. They're going to be leaving the workforce.
Yeah, that's almost a crisis.
So even more opportunity lays ahead. So that's just, people need to be mindful of that. Our educators need to be mindful of that, and business and industries do as well, because it's how we sustain a growing economy. Mm-hmm. That we have a skilled workforce, and we don't have these positions going unfilled indefinitely, because that's going to lead to a downturn.
7 million you mentioned, and then more coming. It sounds like with an aging blue collar workforce, Peter. It is something that I think every business needs to be partnered with. And again, the bill would help provide tax credits for businesses working with school divisions on apprenticeships and other programs that help it. And I don't know. I've talked to some educators that view these kind of things as, oh well, this is, and unfortunately the modern rhetoric of corporate America is greedy and the bosses are greedy and the workforce and the proletariat, and some of this rhetoric gets a little concerning, because the attitude in the educational field I get sometimes is that an apprenticeship program is just a company abusing some poor kid and getting cheap labor out of them, and that's not really what we're talking about here.
Companies are paying big bucks to get the workers that fill the positions, that have the skill sets, okay? But the beauty of an apprenticeship program is you're coming in and learning as you're doing. So you don't have typically the skills that warrant a major wage, a high wage.
But you're in high school.
How you get there. It's a means to an end. I mean, look, this rhetoric, this Marxist rhetoric that you hear out of these places, you could start getting a subjective view of things and say, well, who's demanding the public money?
Yeah.
The universities and the schools and stuff. They never stop demanding public dollars, because that's
easy for them.
That's what they do.
Yeah.
That's their bottom line. That's how they get more resources. Well, companies are in business to make a profit. You make a profit by paying an agreed-upon salary or wage to workers that are going to turn a profit for you. Mm-hmm. And companies are willing to pay pretty good money right now.
Oh, yeah.
Because these jobs are going unfilled. And when they go unfilled, they pay more. That is exactly what's unfolding before our eyes. There's no injustice in any of that.
Exactly the point I was trying to make. There was no exploitations. We're talking about businesses whose reputations are the quality of the workmanship they provide. They're not going to just stick some 16-year-old out there without giving them every ounce of education possible. And so the 16-year-old benefits from that. It is the ultimate in holistic relationships, Peter. And again, remind folks the bill number so that they can push their congresspeople towards it.
HR, that's House of Representatives, HR 5153, USA Workforce Tax Credit Act. They can get more information on our website, usaworkforce.org, and make a call to your congressman's office. Mention that bill number. It's very easy for them to find it. You don't have to be an expert on the contents and what's on page 8, and it's simply.
Right.
This is, they get it. We certainly talk to just about every congressional office about this bill, so it's not a obscure or unfamiliar topic to, if not the members, certainly their staff.
And again, be nice, be with them, and talk to your school boards, because I think some school superintendents getting in behind this as well would be a real kick in the accelerator for some of these bills to move forward, and some of these Congress people, if we show that parents groups, PTOs and things like that are reaching in and trying to get behind this as well. Is that a good place to look for support?
Yeah, I think it's a great idea. I think it's a great suggestion.
Well, Peter, thank you so much. Again, it's Peter Murphy, and it is usaworkforce.org. Find them there, the USA Workforce Tax Credit Act. You can read more about the whole organization at investeducation.org. And when we have you on again the next time, I want to get into some of the other things you're getting into, but this is such a big deal. Thank you for spending a good bit of time with us on it this week, in the abstract, but in the specific as well.
All right, sir. Joe, great to talk to you. Thanks for having me on.
Thank you, Peter. And thank you for listening across the Commonwealth. And again, find out more about us at our website, tertiumquids.org, tertiumquids.org. You can get podcast downloads, find out about our Tuesday morning group coalition meetings as well, and how you can be part of this do tank. You've heard of think tanks. We're a do tank here at the Virginia Institute for Public Policy. Until next week, for all of us here, I'm Joe Thomas. So long, and thanks for all the fish.